Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we will talk about functions in Kotlin. So let's get started. So what are functions in Kotlin? We've actually been working in the scope of a function ever since the first video, which is the main function. Okay, so a function in Kotlin is basically, you can say, a block of code that you can execute whenever you want and wherever you want in your application. Okay. And we're going to start small with functions and then work our way up to more relatable examples. Okay, so let's start with a very small example. And before I do that, I have to do something I've been wanting to do for a while now. Let's just select the sole code and comment it out with the control and / keys. Okay, that's how you comment out a selection. So let's just make a small function to just have a simple print statement. Okay, so the way we can do that, first to create a function, you have to use the fun keyword. Fun stands for function. After that, you have to provide a name for this function. Okay, so in this case, it will be something like greet customer. Okay, of course, you will need to open the parentheses for this function. And after that, you have to open the curly braces. In these curly braces, the code for this function will be executed. Okay, so this is just a simple function. We're just going to have a simple print line statement saying hello customer. Okay, for the customer of our library. And here, in the scope of our main function, at the end, we just write greet customer. That's how you provide access to this function inside the scope of your main function. Okay, that's how you actually call this function. So let's run our main.kt file or function. We're going to say the word function a lot in this video. Okay, so that's it. Hello customer. We commented out all that code just so we don't have 20-30 lines of output. Okay. So that was a very basic example of a function. But let's say we have several customers to greet in our system. So in that case, we don't want to provide a function for every single customer. We just want to have this single function which greets the customer that we want. And how can we do that? Well, you see, with functions, you can actually provide arguments or you can say input data for this function. Okay, and this input data is basically a variable or a set of variables. In this case, the customer name, and this is how you do it. Okay, so in the parentheses of the greet customer, you have to pass a string for the name of the customer that you want to greet inside this function. Okay, so we can write something like name, which is of type string. And as you can see, I already have an error here because no value passed for parameter name. Okay, so now when I have to call this function, I have to provide it with a name. And let's make use of this name here in the print line statement and just write $sign name. Sounds fair? I hope so. And now let's try to greet our customer called Thaer. So that's what we do. And now if I rerun my application here, I now get hello Thaer. And that's just basically how you provide parameters or input data to a function and work with those parameters. Okay. Note something you can't do with parameters, especially in Kotlin. You can't reassign them. Okay, pay attention. You can't do this because in our case, when you pass a parameter to the function, by default, they are val, which means they are immutable. You can't change the value of these variables inside the scope of the function. Okay, just keep note of that. And that's just basically a very simple example for a function and parameters for the function. Okay, now you might ask, why did I go through the trouble of creating a function like greetCustomer if I'm just going to call it in my main function like this? Why didn't I just write this println statement here? Well, as you've seen in the previous videos, our code can get really big, okay? And we're talking about like 190 lines of code, which is still nothing compared to the code that you will write in production level applications. So imagine if all that code were to be written in a single place, how hard would it be to just guess which part of the code you have to modify to maybe add some existing behaviors, remove some existing behaviors, and maybe you just don't need to call this code every time you need to run the main function. Okay, so having this amount of code inside a single function is a lot. Okay, it can get really messy, and that's one of the reasons why we use functions. Another reason is because this whole code was just exclusive to the main function. And what I mean by that is, let's uncomment our code again. So uncomment it, our whole code still works. For example, scroll to the top, you have a variable called borrowed book. If I scroll to the bottom back to greet customer and I try to write borrowed book, I can't do that because borrowed book and everything that's declared in the main function is only exclusive to this main function inside this block of code. Okay. Meanwhile, this create customer function can be called inside the main function and any other function in your application. So if you have something like a fun example function, you can just write create customer there. Okay, you can't do that with the main function, and that's another reason why we use functions in programming. Okay, now I'm going to show you the proper way to make use of functions in programming. Okay, functions should only be responsible to do one thing in particular. So for example, let's say we have this for loop. Okay, let's copy that loop, and what this loop does is basically prompt the user for his credentials a maximum of 3 times. Okay, so if the user enters a valid username and password, he gets logged in. So a print line statement is written with successful login message. Okay, and if the user can't enter these credentials within 3 attempts, he would get print line no more attempts available. Okay, so I think that it's a good idea to refactor this code into a function. Refactor means just basically work again with that code and make it better, make it more concise, re-edit it and change it. Okay, all those stuff. So let's copy this for loop or this for loop. I think it ends here. And you can check that with this beside the for loop. If you click on that, it will get minimized, which shows that the for loop ends here. Okay, so if I expand it again, that's where it ends. Okay, copy that and create a new function. Call it fun process user login. Paste that code here. Let's uncomment or let's comment our code again. And beneath greet customer, let's write process user login. Okay, let's run our main function again. And here, as you can see, we are prompted to enter a username, just like what happens in this function. Okay, so let's enter a valid username, a valid password, and we get successful login. Okay, so this function is just responsible for doing this, just prompting the user to enter a username and a password, and checking them to validate if this user is really this user with the username admin and the password 1234. Okay, and I'm going to show you something we can do with functions. Let's uncomment our code again for the last time, because now I'm going to show you how you can just extract this whole code directly into a function. Okay, select the code that you want to extract and press Ctrl, Alt, and M. Hold them all together, and here you can see our code got extracted into a function, and now we can enter a name for that function. So I'm going to call it initial code. Okay, so the whole code that we wrote in all our previous videos is now inside this function called initial code. And now instead of just commenting our whole 190 lines of code, we can just comment out this function. Okay, if we run that, as you can see, only these two functions get called in the main function. And if we uncomment that again, as you can expect, our whole code gets called again. Okay, so that's a really handy and fast way to refactor your code into functions. Okay, now let's say our library wants to sell stationery items such as pens, and our customer now wants to purchase a few of these pens. Okay, let's make a function that can calculate the price of these pens purchased by the customer. Okay, let's write something like fun calculate price, open these curly braces, and if you want to calculate the price of an item, you basically need the quantity of that item and the price for each item. Okay, let's pass these two as parameters to our calculate price function. So let's write price. This is going to be maybe a double, and the quantity, it's going to be an integer because our customer won't purchase 2.5 pence. Okay, so here we want to calculate the price, and how we can do that is we write, for example, val result equals price times quantity, and that's great. But we want to return this result so that we can check it inside the main function. So how can we do that? Well, in functions, you can have return types. Okay, if we hover over result, it's of return type double. And we want to return this result so that we can work with it inside the main function. And how we can do that is here at the end of these parentheses, you can write column double. So now, if you hover over the ending curly brace of the function, you get an error message, a return expression in a function with a block body, which means you don't have a return statement yet in this function. And this is how you write a return statement. So you write return result. So how can we make use of this result in the main function? Well, in the main function, you can write, for example, val total price equals calculate price, the name of our function. Let's say the price per pen is 1.0. So this is a double. And now we want the quantity. Let's say our customer buys 5 pence. So now we store the value of the return type of calculate price, which is result, inside this variable, total price. Let's print it out to the output window. So let's write print line total price. Let's comment out these two functions as well and run our main function. It's running, stop and rerun. So here you can see 5.0. Okay, so what happened? I created a variable and now I want to assign a value to this variable. The value was a whole function, and this worked because this function had a return type. Okay, so now this variable is of type double, and its value is equal to whatever is in this function, in particular the return statement. Okay, so this function returns a result, and this result is basically the price times the quantity. So now total price is equal to price times quantity for this price and this quantity multiplied together to get 5.0. Okay. One more thing I want you to know about functions in Kotlin is the default values for your parameters. And what I mean by that is this. Our calculate price function, for example, takes a price and a quantity to process them, multiply them together, and return a result. Well, we can do something like this. So our price is of type double. We can give it a default value, for example, like this, equals 1.0. Now, we are free to enter this price if we want, and we can omit it if we don't want to. And what I mean by that is here in the main function, when we call this function calculate price, we can now omit the parameter for price. So we can delete that and we can write quantity equals 5. Let's run our code. So now we're getting the same output. Why? Because when we call the calculate price function, we don't pass a price. So now in the function, the default value is accessed. Okay, so price by default is 1.0. It's multiplied by the quantity that we entered here in the calculate price function from our main function, which is 5. Okay, and if you have a default value and you want to change it when you call calculate price, you can do that as well. So you can write, for example, 2.0, and you can leave quantity equal 5. You can erase that because now you have price and you have quantity as well. Okay. With functions in Kotlin, you can do something like what we did for quantity. Price equals 2.0 and quantity equals 5. It makes your code more readable and you have an idea of what 2.0 is and what 5 is with respect to this function. Okay, so if we run our function, our main function again, we will get 10.0 now. Okay, the default value is not used because we told this function that we want to use our own price. In this case, 2.0. Okay, so that was default values for parameters in Kotlin. So that's about it for functions in Kotlin. If you like this video and you find my content relatable, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content, and I'll see you in the next video.